Okay, we're going to take a look at the assignment that we did in class last week, the CSS 2.5, and I'm looking here at the rubric, so I'm asking for a three-column layout. What I really want is something, I don't want you to do the exact same three-column layout that I did here. So if you have to do something like make the columns different widths, make 4 columns, I don't know, play with it. I want you to get a lot of experience in making different layouts and making different sizes. And it's going to become even more important as we start getting into media queries and making things responsive and all of that. So these are the things we're going to be looking at. I am going to drop zipped code samples in your module, the CSS 2.5 module, so you can get in there and play with that. Again, please do not just give me my exact same layout and change the pictures and the text and stuff. I want you to build your own from scratch so that you get a lot of good practice. So anyway, I already have this made out, so I'm not going to type it live, but I'm going to go together and discuss all of these different things here that we have going on in the module. So let me go ahead and drag this over. So the first thing always that you do in Dreamweaver, and I'm still seeing people not doing this, but remember that the first thing that you have to do is you have to define your site. So you're going to go up here to Site, New Site. If you haven't done it already, define your site. So I'm going to call this CSS 2.5, which I think I already actually have this. So it's probably going to come up, and that little red X told me, hey, you already have this guy. So actually, I already have this site created. It's complaining because it's already done. So I'm going to cancel that, but that is the way you do that. Remember that you are always, always, always supposed to do that. So over here in your local files, you should have something that says the name of your site. As you get a lot of different sites built up, they're going to all show up here. This is my files, by the way, my files menu. And so I can see all the different sites that I have. And right now, since this is a new installation of Dreamweaver, I don't have a lot of sites. If you're using brackets, you have to select your folder. But in any case, what needs to happen is you need to have the correct files showing up here. If you are not directed to the right folder, you're going to have mistakes. It's going to be screwed up. You're going to struggle. Just do this simple step first and your life will be so much easier. Either select the correct folder using brackets or define your site using Dreamweaver. You got to do it. Otherwise, it's not going to make your right stuff. So here, let's take a look at the page that I developed for this. We have my high school here in the background. It's a cover image, and I ask you in this rubric to have an image that covers and it fills the whole page, which works really great when I am sized to fit the whole page. I'm using a computer monitor. Whenever we get into designing for other sites, you'll probably get rid of that, or you'd want something that can change shape. This one always has to be the same X and Y ratio. So sometimes it may or may not be the best choice, but if you get something like clouds in the sky or something where the ratio of X to Y doesn't matter so much, it's a little bit better. Now I have something here. I could probably take this into Photoshop and bleach it out a little bit or something so that it's not strong. What I've done here is I put some text boxes on top of it. And anytime that you have an image in the background, you either have to bleach it out so it's just kind of texture in the background, or you need to put everything in on top of it inside of, like here I have a semi-transparent blocks behind. And the whole point of a website is so that you can read the text. Anytime where you start having things that make it difficult to read the text, like maybe here there's not a lot of contrast, I might want to actually, this transparency is set at 65%. I may want to take it to like 80%, the alpha, and that would make it a little bit less transparent, and then I wouldn't have so much trouble reading this font. You can see how there's difficulty here. And reading, getting your information across is always the number one point of a website. So like visually, I like these kind of transparent. But as far as reading wise, I do see that there's a bit of an issue. So you have to balance these things. So this is my high school, by the way, in the back in Burlington, Iowa. And this is a duck. And this duck is sitting on a Z index. It's actually on top of the text that's back here. So Z index, which is, if you're looking at a graph and you've done two-dimensional graphing in math, you have your x-axis and your y-axis, which is horizontal and vertical, and your z-axis is actually the one that comes out towards you. It's the one that builds depth. It's the third dimension. So I have this duck in a z-index so that it can actually sit here directly on top of the text. The other thing that I've done for this duck, which we try to kind of not do, but it is absolute positioning. So no matter what happens on this page, that duck is going to kind of sit in the same spot in relation to the top of the page. And I'll show you what that is. So you can see a little bit more about positioning, but I could tell this duck to always be in the lower right-hand corner of my page no matter what. So I could put a duck on side of every, like if I wanted to put my own watermark on every website that I made, I could put a little logo or something that would always show up in the bottom right-hand corner of my website, no matter what. And as people scrolled in, scrolled out, and that's absolute positioning. Up to this point, we haven't done that, and you don't see it a lot now because of the different devices. But okay, so anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and move this out of the way, and let's take a look at Dreamweaver. So inside of my HTML code, drag this up a little bit. You can see I'm on my index, and since my site is defined and everything's all nice and pretty, I have here my index, and I can tab between my CSS code because it recognizes that my CSS here is attached, and it will pop it open. So I don't need to open up my CSS as a separate copy. Generally, you don't ever want to do that because sometimes you can make changes in one place and they kind of overwrite, or you save it and it just gets messy. So only have one copy, and I recommend that you have just this where you toggle. Okay, so here in my HTML code, there is really just the basics. I have my container, which wraps around everything. And if I click on this, you can see here's my open and close. It's showing my two things. I have my header. I have a H1 in here. Actually, I want to put an H1 in this, and I'll show you why here. How do you spell column? That's not it. We'll say center because I can't spell. Okay, so I have that. So this is just really basic here. So my header, I have a center, a div here that is called left. I have one over here that is called center and right. Please note that they are showing up in left and center and right, not because I called them left and center and right, but because HTML reads from top to bottom, from left to right. So because this is listed first, it is the left column. I could call it left, but shift it over and put center first, and then center would show up on the left. So the ID has nothing to do with why things are showing up in this area. It's just what I called them here. So I have these different things. Inside of this, I have image. So it's inside of div with the ID of right. I have the image and I have the picture of the duck. And then down here in my footer, I just have some general content. Notice I have no CSS code at all in here. So by assigning a different CSS based upon maybe the viewer, based upon the time of day, I don't know, I could run all kinds of different variables where I checked. I could totally rearrange this page, which happens quite a bit because a lot of times there will be different CSS based on the device you're using or the browser or even part of the country. I mean, they can check all different kinds of things. Right now I just have this one CSS loaded, so let's take a look at this. So my 3 columns, you can see here I have my container. My container has a set width, and I have my margin 0 auto so that it's going in the center. The big thing that I also asked you to do was to use box sizing. And box sizing means that previously when you did the box model, we had to do in our calculations the border and the padding and the margins. Whenever we use box sizing, that means that we only have to calculate in the margins and the size of the box itself. All of the contents, the padding and the border, are considered inside of the box rather than outside of the box, so you don't have to add those things in. The reason why I have these lines is because it's kind of new, so just to make sure that we catch all of the Internet Explorers and all of the Firefoxes, we're telling them, hey, you specifically do this. Actually, if you just use this particular line now, as long as you're using modern browsers, it should work just fine. This right here is interesting. I put this here first. This is a catch-all that says, hey, everything, I don't care what you are, that's a wild card. Everything on this page will be box sized. I don't want to have to deal with it ever. Everything will be box sizing with the border box. So this is something that you can just kind of get used to, just putting that in all of your CSS if you don't want to have to think about the size of your border and the size of your padding throwing things off. Okay. Another thing I asked you to do was to put one image that covers the back of the page. So what I did here was, whenever you're going to put something that covers the whole page, you're going to put it inside of the body. And so here's my image. I'm telling my background image to no repeat, and I am telling the background size to cover the whole page. Now again, you're going to be within limits of X and Y browser sizing, I guess is what I'm looking at. So pick your graphics accordingly, I guess. Okay, so I have my container, the width. Oh, since I have the background, again, remember how I said you have to use that transparency? So down here, whenever I have my different columns, or my different, columns, I guess it is. Whenever I select my background color, I'm using RGB A. The A means alpha. So these are almost pure white. 252 is pure white. They're 251. And then I am at 65% opaque. So it means that I'm 35% transparent, I guess, is the way that goes. And this goes from 0 to 1. So if you want it 50% transparent, it would be 0.5. So you'll notice all of my things have this, except the border is not transparent, but all of them have this. I included a border on this one just so you can see that the border, even though I'm putting in here a thick border, which I think is like 3 pixels. I'm not exactly sure, but since I put that there, but since I am using that border box up here, box siding, I don't have to calculate in the width of my border. I don't have to know it. I don't have to think about it. It just goes on the inside of my box. So what it's actually doing is subtracting from my width of 320 as opposed to adding on to the width of 320. Padding is the same. I put a little bit of padding in here so that my text, oops, let's go to this one, so that my text isn't bumped right up to the side of the boxes. Now this right here, why do if you looked at this, I have padding on the sides, but I don't have padding on the top. But why does it look like I have padding on the top? Well, the reason why it looks like I have padding on the top is because I have everything inside of a P tag, inside of a paragraph tag, which automatically skips a line. It puts a space between things. So since this is in a P, there's automatically top padding or top margin, I guess, depending on how you want to look at it. So I don't need padding on the sides. I only need padding on the top. Or excuse me, I don't need padding on the top. I just need it on the sides. So you can see here, it's 0 for top, right, bottom, left. That's the order of operations here. Top, right, bottom, left. You go around clockwise, starting at the top. So 0 at the top, 20 at the right, 0 at the bottom, 20 at the left. Okay, and I think the last thing, oh, I have two things that I talked about here. Notice here that I have, let's take a look. Let me save all real quick. Okay, notice here that this center is smaller than this, which should be kind of interesting because if we look at our code, you can see that this title is H1 and this title is H1. So technically, before I add CSS, they should be the same size. So why does this one come out bigger? Well, I chained together a couple things. So you can see here by saying inside of the header, I want the H1 to be this larger font size. By the way, I'm showing you EMs because that is another way to size text. It's usually responsive for, it takes the size of whatever your browser size is for the letter, small letter M, the default. So this is 5 default letter M's high. So you'll see that. So I chained these two things together. I only want this to apply this H1 sizing to the H1 that is inside of the header. Down here, there is nothing specific, but the point here is that by chaining these selectors together, you can see, sometimes 3 or 4 in a row, you kind of narrow in on the item that you want to control. Here I want the link items that are in the center, and I don't have a list in there, but if I did, you could see that I would, if I had a list, that these would have this particular coloring, and then if I had list items somewhere else, they wouldn't get that specific control. So that is what I mean by chaining together selectors. And you generally go from very broad to very specific in there. So you can see like the center, this is the parent of this. These link items would be inside of that. This H1 is inside of that. Now I could say H1 header body or something, or H1 header container, but which wouldn't make much sense because everything goes in the header, everything goes in the container, but whatever. So that's what I mean by chaining things together. So let's go ahead and take a look at the rubric and see if I covered everything. Okay, I still have to talk about the z-index, but we did talk about the 3-column layout, stringing together CSS background image that covers a full. Okay, so my z-index here is just this. here's inside of the right column, I have my z-index equals 10. So I can go from, actually you can go into negative numbers if you want, but z-index I think goes all the way up to into the thousands if you want it to be. I put 10 on here because you don't have to go by ones. In fact, I very rarely, when I'm designing a page, go by singles, because every once in a while I want to slip something in or have something navigate across the page, and I may want it to go between layers. So it's nice to have a little wiggle room. I don't use z-index a whole heck of a lot, but it's handy for when I do want to use it. You can also see that I'm doing absolute positioning, and it is 230 pixels from the top of the page. But the interesting thing is that it is 230 pixels from the top of the page, but since it is positioned within this right column, even if I bump it up, let's say, it's always going to stay there inside of that, or on the right hand side of the page. So let's say I say 20 pixels from the top of the page. Now my duck has moved up. It's now 20 pixels from the top of the page, but it is still, interestingly, inside of the boundaries, the right and left boundaries of the right column, because inside of my code, it's inside of that right. You can see here it is. It's inside of the right div. So it stays there, but it can actually move vertically outside of that div, but stay within horizontally the constraints. There are weird things that happen in HTML. For instance, oh, let me show you another one that's weird. If you look at my page, you can see here that I have a little bit of a margin. Since I put this in here, by the way, it bumped that down, but I have a little bit of a margin here, and I have to put that margin as a bottom margin for these guys, because if I put it as a top margin for my footer, it doesn't work. I don't know. It's just the way HTML sometimes deals with margins, especially top margins. Like here, even though I don't have a top margin, it gives me a little bit of a top margin. So there is some reasoning behind that, and there's a story behind top margins and the way they work. I couldn't tell you right now, but I do know sometimes I have to battle things, and it's not uncommon for me to actually have a negative margin for the top of my page. Anyway, that is how your whole project goes together. Go ahead and have fun with this, and let me know if you have any questions.